So, okay, well, I guess we can go ahead and start now. I'm Roger Linn, and this is Garrett Bevan from the Eigenharp company, who is not only a demonstrator, but primarily he's one of the senior software engineers who created the Eigenharp. And then to my left, to your right, is Ed Goldfarb, who's a local Bay Area musician, pianist, arranger, producer, composer, who is going to demonstrate the Continuum keyboard. And these are things that, all of which you can see the back of, except for this one, which you can see the front of. So I'm going to be demonstrating a little prototype of an instrument I have called the LinnStrument, which is this funny little thing here. Has anyone seen, or has anyone heard of this instrument before? And has anyone seen the video on my website or on YouTube? Okay, that's good. So we have a pretty hip crowd here tonight, I can tell already. Why are we here, and what's so important about these instruments? Well, I'm going to make the argument that even though all of us are familiar with many different controllers and synthesizers that have happened over the past 30 years or so, that a tipping point has finally arrived where there are controllers now, or musical instruments, that offer the sensitive capture of human finger gestures that are as good as, or maybe even better than in some cases, traditional musical instruments. And that I think that's a very significant moment in the evolution of musical instruments. And why do I say that? Well, hey Tim, how you doing? Tim Thompson, ladies and gentlemen, who actually helped in the software of the LinnStrument that we have here. So what's the big deal about these instruments? I think the big deal is that these three instruments, the LinnStrument, the Eigenharp, and the Continuum, are the first instruments to offer real-time continuous capture of pressure, x-axis and y-axis for every finger polyphonically. And why that is significant is we've had excellent instruments for centuries. We've had the violin, we've had the clarinet, we've had guitar, and these instruments were able to make wonderfully expressive solos, but they only played one note at a time. Or we had the piano, which could play polyphonically, but didn't have the expressiveness in terms of variation of pitch and timbre over time that the wind instruments did or the bowed instruments did. And so all the instruments you're seeing tonight actually can capture the finger's position in real time in 3 dimensions. And I think that's a very, very significant moment. And these two actually are available. Mine's still a dream for me. I need to have I'm still working on a new sensor for it, but I'm very interested in the subject anyway, and I thought it was good to show this as well. So I thought what we'd start off by doing is giving you a little audio example of each instrument. So why don't we just go left to right? Would you like to start?
Yeah. So I've been playing the Eigenharp for the Alpha for a little bit less than a year, which is a very short amount of time for playing a new instrument, right? Imagine that you sit at a piano and you've never touched it before. I'm going to do my best, right? And is the sound turned on?
Is it up?
No. So I'm playing a physical model here of a cello that comes with the software of the Eigenharp, and I'm going to bow it with a strip controller. This is usually a very uncomfortable position to be playing it in because physically I'm pushing against this strip controller, and as you can see the Eigenharp is pivoting, so I'm kind of counterbalancing it with my foot. Ideally you'd kind of slide out the spike here at the bottom and then sit on a chair. Well, I'm going to try it like that. I thought it was a good idea to try it like this. Just to show what you can do with the cello. Now, nice thing about, as you said, those keys and the fact that you can use them in different dimensions is that I can, for example, choose to play the cello with one of these keys, and just to show how expressive a key can be, is you just saw me bowing with this side. but I can actually decide to lower the key just by brushing over it. Short demo of something on the Eigenharp.
Okay. So I'll do a little bit of this thing that I call the LinnStrument. Now what this actually is a pressure-sensitive multi-touch surface that was made by a short-lived company called Touchco. That I was planning on making the instrument using their technology, and then Amazon bought them and shut them down, unfortunately. So I'm currently working with a couple of other developers to make a new pressure-sensitive multi-touch surface. And what I've done with this thing is basically taken this surface and then put an overlay on top that has note names. And there's a little, you can't really see it from there, but there's a die-cut overlay which allows me to feel the ridges of each note square. And the way I've arranged the notes, and it could really be any arrangement, but the way I've arranged the notes is chromatics, arranged in with chromatic rows with offsets of fourths. I chose that because I'm a guitar player primarily, and I was always not very fond of that pesky third between the B and the G strings, because I always ruined the isomorphism of the instrument. And one of the things in this community of new instruments that's very important is isomorphic layouts. In other words, being able to have one fingering that you play for a chord regardless of what the key is. Now, of course, as I'm sure you well know, if you try to do that on piano, if you're going to play a major triad in the key of C, you'll have to have a different fingering in each of the 12 keys, which is really a pain in the neck. And so there are many different new layouts. There are layouts using hex keys. There's this grid layout that we're using. And I think that you know, some people would say, well, that makes some great sounds, it's very sensitive, but why don't you just use a piano keyboard? And I think the reason is because each of us recognize that there are limitations not only in issues of the lack of isomorphism, but also in the ability of expression for each note in 3 dimensions to the normal piano keyboard. And so that's why these instruments all choose some funny different way of interfacing with the human body. So what I've got in this case, what I'm going to show you is this is, once again, 3-dimensional sensitive. Each note is sensitive to my finger pressure, to my access direction on the finger, and also in this case to the Y dimension, where I affect timbre, the Y axis. Now what you're hearing, the only thing you're hearing, is a pulse wave with a low-pass filter, and that's it. There's no envelope generators, because here are my envelope generators right here, all 3 of them. And here's another 3, and here's another 3, and here's another 3, and here's another 3. So once again, what we have is the ability to get solo expressivity, a high degree of solo expressivity, polyphonically, independently for each finger. In fact, Linn Hagen, who makes the Continuum, likes to think of his instrument not as a polyphonic instrument, but as a multiple monophonic instrument in a sense. So I'm going to play actually in honor of our, I'm sure everyone's dear friend Max, who of course is no longer with us. He used to demonstrate his radio baton playing Bach's Air on the G string. And so that's what I'm going to do, a brief and very, very simplified arrangement on this LinnStrument. And I'll probably make a few mistakes because I'm new to it, but I'll take my best shot anyway. Start again. is so interesting about this is all that is a bunch of pulse waves and low-pass filters and nothing else. Well, a little reverb. Reverb always helps. So now let's move on to the Continuum and to Ed Goldfarb, who's going to do some brief demo on this one.
Right on. So much as dogs can smell fear, gear can smell a demo. So my Continuum is being a little wonky after a year of dedicated service. It's quickly becoming a discontinuum. I was going to show you the latte maker option and all that stuff, but all good. It hasn't completely. I'm not going to say anything. But what we've got here, the Continuum is a three-dimensional multiple monophonic controller, as Roger put it, and it's fiendishly difficult to play because it will round to the middle of a note, but if you're just the teeniest bit off, it can clear a room. So it does take a little getting used to, and the fact that it's set up like a keyboard, but there is only helps you enter the room. To rule the room, you have to get used to the fact that each key is of exactly the same size, the isomorphic nature, which I guess if you're starting out with it, it's awesome because a D-flat scale is the same as an A scale or whatever. But if you're used to playing a keyboard, it's really weird.
Just interject. For those of you who don't know the keyboard, it has a squishy surface. It's kind of like a mouse pad or a wetsuit, rubber, and then since each key he retained the width between octaves, it means each key which the semitones are of equal width and spacing. It makes each key just a little bit narrower, so it's a little bit trickier to hit the keys. And if you're a piano player, you come up to it and you say, well, the keys are quite narrow by comparison to a piano. Actually, Ed was saying that after playing it for a while, and I have not had experience with it, but it actually feels very natural. It's a little bit tricky, and there are tricks like anywhere you land in the note region at first is quantized, and then it quantizes a little bit over time, so it keeps you in tune. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, that's basically it. And it sends MIDI, of course, and if you set up your MIDI synths to be monophonic, you can get a bunch of different voices going. And there's a control voltage option that I use with the bank of analog modular synths, and that's really cool. That would have just been distracting here. But it does have a bunch of great built-in sounds, one of which is functioning correctly at the time that I'm speaking. And that's you, right? Because if that's me, that's a bummer. Okay, well, you know, any wrong note that you hear is the instrument's issue, not and the sounds are developed on a kaima, never said it aloud, in mixed company. One of the two. So it's got a stripped down a couple of boards in here that they give you a bunch of internal sounds in, which are quite capable. So here's a model guitar doing a little. And again, there's not. If you press hard in this particular sound, there's an envelope, but you can basically bring the sound from nothing just with your finger. And I'm going from front to back now. This sound has sort of built-in feedback to it. Listen to that sustain. Just go out for a bite.
usually people wait far too long to let people ask questions. If you have any questions, just chime in. Because I'm more interested in really asking your questions and make sure you leave with an understanding of what you wanted to learn.
I guess I've become real interested in just the whole notion of touch interfaces as a result of the iPad's release and potentially the cost point of these kind of devices maybe coming down. Do you guys have any thoughts about the iPad and where you see that evolution?
Go ahead.
So I've been trying to play almost every instrument that seems worthwhile on the iPad. One of the things that I miss most is what I like most about the Eigenharp, which is the physical touch and the physical control over a particular solid piece that's part of the instrument. Just like on the Continuum, you've got a squishy surface that gives you this, I can dig in, right? Like on a guitar string, you can just dedicate yourself to get that string to vibrate. On the Eigenharp, I don't know if you can see it well, but each key is rounded like a little bow, so your fingertips kind of grab hold of the key, and then you can really move them into any direction that you would want. On the iPad, it's just a flat surface, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, you always have to look at it, because it's just impossible to look up and to play right. And then you miss that physical control. I also find that it's too small. You can just only play leads on it. I tried playing with Morphwiz, Jordan Rudess' app that I kind of like the most. There's also Thumb Jam that's quite nice, and then there's something else called Expression Pad. I don't know, it's not that well known, but Expression Pad I like a lot. But it always comes back to the same thing, which is this physicality of being able to hold an instrument. And then there's another side to which is, I think, quite unique to the Eigenharp compared to the others, which is the fact that you can just move around on stage, right? You're like a guitar player, you can come forward to the audience, you can move around, just have one single cable that's been designed to be on stage. You don't have to go around with adapters and trying to put it into this 3.5 inch stereo mini jack to go on to another cable and then have problems on stage. So this is something I think that's very important if you want to start gigging with an instrument. It has to be thought out from the beginning and not kind of a side effect. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, I would add to that. I would say there's two main things. Number one is the lack of tactile feedback, as Gert said. But in truth, you could, in fact, as I put a die-cut plastic overlay over this, you could put a die-cut plastic overlay over an iPad, and that would help. But the main thing is it has no pressure sensing. And all capacitive touchscreens, which is all touchscreens. Hey, Vern! All touchscreens are capacitive, and they really don't sense. It's impossible for them to sense pressure. They can actually
width of the finger.
They can do finger surface area, but it's interesting if you put your finger at a perpendicular or oblique position against a hard surface, and you press lightly or you press hard, it's pretty much the same surface area. And if you add that to the fact that oh, Marge, hi, thanks. If you add that to the fact that the touchscreens, they do interpolate to get high resolution, but that doesn't give them much in the way of surface area sensing. So at some point, I think touchscreens will have pressure sensitivity, and really for this sort of application, I think you need to sense true pressure and not just surface area. One other problem with surface area is that this is a louder note at a soft touch than this is at a very, very hard force touch, because there's more surface area in the flat of your finger. But that said, there is an app that's called, well, first of all, let me start off to say that in the iOS API, that's two acronyms at once, that's pretty good. In the iOS API, there are actually calls to sense finger surface area, as you pointed out, but you can't have an app approved if you use it. Which means they put something up quick and they intend to improve it, perhaps.
I think you can on Android.
Yeah. And but the interesting thing is there's an app on the web on the App Store called Musician, and it uses actually the same layout, a grid layout as this. But what he did is he got the app selected, he got it passed, but it has a back door to get into turn on finger sensitivity surface area. You can do, there's 2 buttons on the bottom of it. Who knew about this? Interesting.
Who was a musician?
Musician.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and so there are a bunch of little hieroglyphic buttons at the bottom of the screen, and if you do a little paradiddle on 2 of them, it turns on finger sensing mode. And if you want, just get Musician, which I think may even be free at this point on the iPad, and just write to the developer, and he'll tell you how to do it. Or write me. I'm at, it's rogerlinndesign.com. It's rl@rogerlinndesign.com. If you want to ask me about it, I'll tell you how to do it.
There's probably an Apple Spy here. It's going to be off the store by
Yeah. That's it.
Bar the doors!
You do
Stanley.
Yeah, Roger, 2 things. One, I see a lot of linearity there, and I still like curved stuff, you know? My hands go like this, so can you make something curved? But my larger point is one made by your friend and mine, Mr. Smith. Based on, which goes back to experience with the T and so forth. To the extent that you require, specialized playing techniques, everybody wants, like I just said, can you make it incurved? It tends to, it tends to fight against the standard. It tends to fracture things and, frankly, drive costs up. And it makes things almost impossible for alternate controllers. So without getting into the specifics of your business, I know materials have changed, manufacturing processes have changed incredibly well. But do you see that we're at a real tipping point? Or is that what you're really arguing in controller design?
Well,
in the economics?
The short answer is no. The problem we have is the chicken egg problem, where nobody wants to invest in a new instrument, or few people want to invest in a new instrument unless they know it's going to be around in a few years, and it won't be around in a few years unless people invest in the instrument. They buy the instruments,
You need quantities to drive it down, right?
Pardon?
You need quantities to drive the costs down. Which is
Exactly. Quantities, exactly. You need the economies of scale. I would say that, fortunately, the Eigenlabs company is fairly well financed, and they've done. I tell you, when I first saw their website, I heard about it, saw the website, my jaw absolutely dropped at how beautifully designed and handcrafted this instrument is. And later, when you come up and take a peek, and by the way, later I want everybody to play these instruments and get a real hands-on feel for them. But it's just an absolute work of art. As you can see the thing, it's just amazing. And I can't do it. I got a damn piece of plastic with some stuff on it, So, I mean, my little company is just my wife Ingrid, excuse me. Who actually, I should say is we wrote the Max MSP app together for the synthesis of this. So she's very much involved. But I would say that making sexy shapes, making organic shapes is easier these days, at least to make prototypes of, with services like eMachine Shop or places like Tech Shop San Francisco and Tech Shop, Menlo Park. People are able to do more, and with 3D programs, for example, I use Rhino 3D to make SL stereolithography files and such. So it makes it easier to make prototypes of it. Obviously, it's very expensive to make molds for high volume production. So it is difficult, and I think probably it'll be more difficult to have instruments like this appear until there's more acceptance. Whereas what I'm going to do is probably not all the different from the Continuum, which is a sheet metal casing and with the elements inside it. And it's more, it appeals more to the people who are really interested in what it practically does. But I suspect probably in each of these instruments there will be initial models which are less sexy but very functional. And then once the demand comes up, then the price will come down and probably they'll get sexier looking. And it's just, I would say the Eigenharp is probably a singular moment in history.
And I'll add that there's an incredible stand available for the Continuum that costs half what the Continuum does, but it looks like it was designed by H.R. Geiger. It's got 2 mouths and it's going to have babies that love themselves and kill their family. It's just gorgeous, but no one owns one because it's so incredibly expensive. So.
Yes?
I'd like to continue with the demonstration because there's something missing. What kind of feedback do you get besides your ears? I see a lot of nice little lights flashing. You've got a big screen there. Is there any visual feedback as to what the computer's doing before you do it on the Huck and the right.
Oh, on the Continuum, well, I can see exactly where my finger is. Other than I can hear it, but other than that, no.
You know what instrument you're going to get.
Well, you can hook it up to a laptop. I don't do laptops, but you've got a complicated system of pressing a side button and then using the keys you go into menu mode, and then the keys just become switches. And so you can select your sounds, you can change the volume. That's the stuff that's not really working that well.
You know whether you did it right or not.
You don't, but you figured it out after a while.
Let's say you've got your finger on the wrong key on the keyboard, and you go into this mode and you get something other than what you expected.
Nothing is nothing. I've never gotten into any place that I couldn't get out of in a couple of seconds. Like I said, it's not really working that great. But I can go through the motions. Bump. You get used to it.
It's worked with you.
Yeah.
So I will say, for my instrument, there is currently no visual feedback, but the sensor that I'm developing, this is actually an opaque sensor, so it could not have any LEDs in the back. But the sensor that I'm developing is going to be transparent, or translucent anyway, so there will be LEDs in the back to show, for example, instead of this hard printing of the note names and then the black and white keys I've got, the note names in semitones, what I'm going to develop is, what's I'm planning to develop anyway, would have an array of LEDs behind it, so I could indicate, for example, the naturals or however you want to. For example, on a guitar neck, as a guitar player, there are dots at certain places that indicate. But what I find now is that because it is isomorphic and I'm playing more in terms of relative pitch, that I find the visual feedback of looking at it and, hey guys, it's like old home week, I'm seeing old home. I find myself thinking more in relative pitch and just looking at the spaces between my hands or my fingers as opposed to the real note names.
What about choosing voices?
Pardon?
Choosing voices.
Well, on mine, unfortunately, I only have one voice. I just have square waves with the filter, or rather full space with the filter. I haven't done that much into creating the different sounds. And probably these guys, they have both a wide variety of sounds to them, especially the Eigenharp. What would be your answer to this?
Yeah, so my answer to this is, first of all, when you sit down with a guitar, you don't ask yourself what happens if I accidentally push the volume up. You just train yourself not to push the volume up, right? So I think this is in one part a problem that is overthought too much, but let's say that it's not, right? So you've got one interface here on the Eigenharp, which is a mode button that allows you to switch between active modes. So in this case, the green key that is lit up shows me which instrument is lit up, right? I can assign different sounds to each key, and then I can just switch my sounds, right? So I learned by just myself to know which key corresponds to which sound, which is just 10 minutes of work, right?
I think I misunderstood your question. I was talking about visual feedback while you're playing as opposed to how you configure the instrument.
So, and then there's the second part, which is the visual feedback while you're playing. You can configure the Eigenharp as you want to it. So in this case, I put marker lights to indicate the notes, the roots of the scale. So I know that this will always be the root, and then I can move it like this. So this is based on your preference. There are some people that put it on the fifth also. Some people that play without it. This is a chromatic mode, so I like to know where the roots are. Otherwise, I'm just totally lost. But if I'm playing in a major scale, then I'm just totally okay. I don't really need to know where the roots are because I know that it starts from here and then it goes upwards. And then there's another way of doing it, which is actually using the iPad to show you how the instrument has been configured. And I'm having problems with the demo gods also. So this should show exactly what that shows. But it's not, due to some wireless network, I think. I don't know why. But so this is also something that ships with a bunch of default tabs and allows you to, for example, now I'm in one of the samplers and I can change the velocities, I can change the envelopes, I can change how everything is actually being controlled. I can have an iPad next to me and then move faders in real time if I want to. So this kind of allows you to configure it any which way you like with a very functional default setup for everything that's readily available.
You know, I have a question. I've identified the node interface that I like with this and the note layout, and you've identified it on this instrument. Could you talk a little bit about the note layout interface on the Eigenharp?
So, the way that the Eigenharp is set up is that you've got two things that are mapped together. Basically, courses. So you've got 5 courses that move up like that, right?
The rows, or they
Rows are called courses. Why are they called courses? Because they're more than rows. If you play the cello, it will automatically detect that you're on a string because it's a physical model. It will stop playing the previous note, right? While when I play a piano, they continue sounding at the same time. So course has this concept of if it's a stringed instrument, then I can know that it's the same string, right? So we've got courses going up. And then we work in blocks of 4 because you naturally put your thumbs either on the back or on the side of the instrument.
Groups of 4 this
so you've got groups of 4 fingers that you press down, you go up, and then you move to the right. So you can play. And then over that layout, you kind of map a scale. So standard it ships with, if you turn it on and you don't do anything with it, it's a major scale over this layout, and then you can switch it on the fly. You can say, okay, I actually don't want a major scale, but I want a chromatic scale. Right? So, and then if you want to go a step further, you can say, okay, I don't want my courses to be laid out like that, but I want to make, so in this setup, for example, I've got courses that actually move up this way. It's like I've got strings that way, because I didn't want to have any note duplication. Because in this layout you've got, it's like on a guitar, you've got notes that are repetitive across the neck. Right?
So for example, I'm fond of the layout I've used on this one, which is rows of chromatics offset by 4s. You could set it up that way, or you could use the major scales or minor scales, the diatonic modes that are on by default. So really, they've offered a wonderful a blank canvas that allows you to choose the mode you'd like to use it, because there is this wonderful competition for ideas of what a note interface for the 21st century is. You know, one of the problems, and one of the things we were discussing earlier, is that the acoustic instruments that we all know and love all have note interfaces that are highly constricted by the fact that they were tied to the sound generation method. For example, the piano is in a long line because you had to have a string behind every key. You don't, of course, need to have that anymore. And that means that, for example, if I sit down to a piano, I have to look either at this hand and make sure I'm playing the right notes, or at this hand, but they're usually too far apart. And so I like the idea of them being put together in rows, so they're in the same general idea, similar area, so I can see what both hands are doing at the same time. A guitar is, of course, my main instrument, and I love it very much, but the notes are really big at one end, they're really tiny at the other end, and that makes it harder to play. And so I like the idea of being able to make the notes equal spaced, because my fingers are all equally spaced. Well, this one's a little bit thinner than this one, but I like the idea of equal sized note regions. And so, and then of course, take wind instruments, or reed instruments specifically, the note layout is based on where you need to have those little holes covered or uncovered on a tube. So being able to separate the note layout from the design of the note layout from the sound generation is, I think, infinitely powerful. And so some people, for example, when they see our instruments, we were talking about this, they say, that's great, but why don't you just make it with a piano keyboard? Or why don't you just make it with a guitar neck? And I think the reason is because the sort of thinking that goes into creating a new sort of instrument with new sounds and new abilities to create high levels of solo expressivity tends to lead to the same sort of thinking that says, why don't we also have a new note layout for these times, because we're no longer constricted by those old rules.
Yeah, and they, you know, even if you're used to a piano keyboard or guitar layout, it just gives you new creative ideas. It was those of you who were into 20th century classical music, when I saw Roger's layout, I'm like, oh wow, Paul Hindemith will love this, because you know he had so much theory about composition based on fourths. And the guitarist Ralph Towner has talked about how he would do solo concerts. He would just literally tune at random and then he'd just start improvising.
Yeah.
You know, which is a neat trick, but you can do that on these instruments, and you know, in the comfort of your own home without a paying audience, wondering why. In the Continuum, even though you can't really change the layout without a scissor and an angry call from Lippold after you've voided your warranty irreparably, but you can tune each individual key. You can determine what pitch range the entire keyboard is going to cover. So before anyone comes up to change the instrument, I'm going to play the instrument. I'm going to make sure that C and C sharp are the same. Just to.
One thing I'd add is that also Garrett was telling me that on the Continuum you can actually define the exact frequency of each key. It's a 32-bit floating point number, I believe, right?
Yeah, also in the Eigenharp.
Yeah, that's what I was speaking of. Yeah.
Well, I think this is an interesting idea, well, the interesting concept that you talked about, which is it's something that I experienced as a guitar player. I started to feel more creative while I started playing in open tunings and not actually knowing what I was playing, and just listening to the sounds and trying to develop the relationship between the positions of my fingers, and okay, I'm moving up and it's going to be this relationship of notes. And then when I started back playing in standard tuning, I stopped thinking in standard tuning, but I tried to do the same thing as when I was playing in open tuning. And this is what I find on these instruments also, the Eigenharp, and I've got a Continuum also, I've got the exact same thing with it, which is you basically take what you get and you try to be as expressive with it as you can and try to make music with it. And then putting yourself in another mode, which might be more convenient, right? So sometimes you want to play large ranges and then you say, okay, let's put everything just in a major scale without any accidentals in between. It is a constraint, but at the same time, it allows you to be creative with boundaries. And I personally like that. So,
Doesn't Albert King like capo at 14th fret or something? Just got one of those guys. He's one of the kings. It's not BB.
Yeah, one of the kings.
Can you play an example of the Eigenharp with the mouthpiece that you were doing earlier?
Oh yeah, sure.
So I'm not a really good mouthpiece player, but let's try this. Which scale I was.
One thing I would say about the Eigenharp is that they really engineered all the different human inputs very, very well, very sensitively, and you can tell just by the wind interface and the coupling to the sound generator that really has a very natural feeling.
That's where I think when you were talking about the tipping point of the electronic instruments. Allow yourself to become the envelope generator, which actually is what makes you expressive, because what you hear coming out of speakers relates to a physical action that you actually undertook. It's not something that has been automated by some kind of a patch that has been pre-programmed in the synth. Each change you make has a relationship to the sound that you're hearing. And that's why I think you start feeling that you're expressive. Otherwise you feel detached from the music, and now you're all of a sudden involved in the music that you're making. And that makes them instruments and not controllers anymore.
It's different from any other electronic instrument. I think that's what we were talking about with the iPad. That's the fundamental crux of it. That when you are the envelope, then it becomes a real instrument. Exactly. If you aren't, then it's something else. It's a toy or a controller or a programmer.
By the way, can everybody hear us okay? I realize that we don't have microphones. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, question just sort of about the infinite possibilities of all these things, and I wonder if that's sort of like a barrier to long-term acceptance of a new musical interface, because they all do provide sort of a lot more expressivity than sort of a standard electronic music instrument, but they do all sort of offer the same thing in some ways, and you can kind of be like, well, I can't really afford this one, this one's good enough, and I can be the envelope with this one, or and so it's like people can sort of hedge and not really have to like commit themselves to it because there is all of this sort of like scalability, and there is a lot of like acceptance of things just being kind of good enough. It's like doing email on an iPad. It's not great, but it's good enough. You can do it.
Well, it's a good point. I think that there's Well, there are a number of barriers to entry. One is the cost that it takes to make an instrument such as this or that. I haven't established the cost on this. Actually, this one here, the Touchcode company which made this was quoting $10 per square foot in high quantities. So this could be a $99 instrument. And so, but by the time I'm finished with it, I'm sure it won't be.
But I mean, that's from the developer's standpoint, just from like sort of the consumers and general, the musician's acceptance of a new musical interface. There is sort of like, well, that thing's very expensive and it's very seductive, but it's kind of just going to be like, well, it's going to be a mermaid out of rock.
Well, I don't know. I'm almost always amazed when I see my musician guitar. I mean, my friends that play the guitar and they walk around with a $7,000 Gibson, and I don't know what kind of Marshall stack, and then a whole bunch of vintage effects, and they just go to gigs with $20,000 worth of material.
Yeah.
So I think this is. When you find something you relate to, and that's why I think the competition also between these instruments is very interesting, because each person has a different way that he feels comfortable interacting with a musical instrument. Some people, like me, I like to play it like this. I totally hate putting my hands down like that, which is why I've not really dug into the Continuum, even though I own one. Since you're a keyboard player, you like playing like that. So I think there's a bunch of things that come in mind here that are not only cost. We're talking about music.
But another point is that with some of these older instruments, you have to chase that sound. It's like, well, if I want a saxophone sound, I have to play a saxophone, and I'm going to have to commit myself to that, and that's what I'm going to have to do, because there's no other way. Whereas, it's like, well, this sounds tied to software, so it's like, well, you can plug something else in and get that sound, and sort of like kind of get good enough and sort of keep that unit. So I just kind of see that as sort of a barrier to acceptance, and it's something I sort of struggle with. My own. So.
Well, as you progress as a musician, I think that you go through different levels where you want to express yourself more. Yeah. I know that as a frustrated guitarist and possibly the world's worst living violinist, that something like this, as a keyboard player, just enables, it's a totally natural extension of my desire to express myself musically. He said, possibly sharing too much. But I think, only certain kinds of musicians are going to get to that place. But, what we're doing, hopefully, is letting as many people know. We're kind of preaching to the converted here, but if more people know about these instruments, especially young players, they're going to see, wow, I can do that. I can make all these sounds or make new sounds, but I can be linked to them, as we were talking about, when you are the envelope, which we should probably trademark. It's kind of a race, isn't it? So why don't you guys take it, because I'm just a representative.
Well, part of what you said was something about the infinite options makes it a little bit hard, it's a little bit confusing for people. And I think we were talking about that very thing today. It's hard to know. I'm very close to this instrument, so it's hard for me to describe it in terms that are very concise but very simple. I tend to go off in details too much. And it is a difficult thing to be able to say, to be able to keep an awareness of what someone who's new to this, the whole subject, wants to hear. What is the thing that makes them most excited? And it's often not a bunch of details and scan rates and things like that. But that's why I wanted to go to Q&A as soon as possible. But yeah, I bored people for quite a long time telling them about things they didn't want to hear about something they initially were excited about, but then I started to gloss over.
I guess one thing I think about in all of these instruments, it's all an experiment, and in some sense a very costly experiment to figure out if it's something that you'll really gravitate towards. Yeah. So one of the things I wonder about, is there a way to separate kind of the value add that somebody provides? Either it's the creation of the instrument itself from the software side, and create kind of an open source kind of model where, if I buy that instrument, it's all available to me. So that company goes out of business, I still have this instrument and I can do something with it.
It's great, because 2 days ago we open sourced the software.
There you go.
So it's available on the We planned on doing that from the beginning, but to get started, we had to use some proprietary libraries, and that we re-implemented, and eventually now everything's
clean them up to be able to make them open source.
So now it's available on GitHub, and it's been available for 2 days, and we already got patches, which is great.
Yeah, and not only that, but they've been using a proprietary communication for the notes coming out of it, and they're changing over to, or at least including OSC, so that'll make it a lot easier to adapt to.
So,
Robert, do you have a question? You had your hand up at one point.
Yeah, I was just curious. In fact, everybody's dancing around this question. OSC, you just mentioned, you've been mentioning more in the envelope. Whenever I've experimented with alternate controllers, it seems to me that there is a disconnect between all of the models that we're using for communication, which are event-based, versus the models that we've used for centuries with musical instruments, which are gesturally based. And a lot of sounds are generated in a half-continuous form. Let's say it's a wind instrument, and you're playing a flute. Your breath makes the sound sharper, flatter, louder, softer, stop, or start. And it's not a note yet. It's a note when you move your fingers. The whole thing is a continuum. Yet MIDI, out of necessity, as Stanley knows, was event-based because it carries a lot less information. And OSC helps a little bit with this, but it strikes me that we're still dealing with metaphors that have a disconnect between the communication interface with the muscles and with the sound generation on the computer end. And I'm wondering what efforts are being made to help these flexible, gesturally based interfaces communicate to more gesturally based sound generation.
You want to take it?
So actually, this is the exact same problem that we had with Eigenharp, some software that runs the Eigenharp. I didn't go into the technical details in the beginning, but just to summarize it up, the Eigenharp doesn't output MIDI. So we've got our software called EigenD that takes all the information in high resolution and then massages it. But everything goes in as individual streams, all separate. And at one point, exactly as what you said, based on the instrument that you're using, we'll decide that it becomes a note. But that can be different based on each different instrument, and that can be based on different control inputs that you're using. So you've got these streams of data that kind of merge and disconnect, and you can have very difficult things, which is like, for example, piano sustain that starts when the note has already ended because the string is still vibrating, right? So, so we modeled that out in EigenD. And that is what we're doing now. So the first step is open sourcing EigenD. In version 2 that we're working on now, we're actually going to replace most of these things with OSC controls and then publish a white paper about an idiomatic usage of OSC to actually be able to map it to music and musical continuous long-lived events. In the hope that there will maybe be a discussion coming to life, thanks to that, to come to a new model and protocol for these new instruments that we can all adopt and then integrate with it and develop software for it that actually benefits from it.
And people in this audience in particular would be very useful in refining that specification. So I think probably if they go to your site, to the eigenlabs.com site, there will be probably some sort of link to get into that. And I know also on the opensoundcontrol.org site, there is some sort of a group that's working to try and create a standard over OSC for musical notes, because OSC, as flexible as it is, I think they wanted to make sure that it could do everything and not constrict anybody to anything. So it doesn't have a standard for notes and for the things that we'd like to agree upon. So it's made it a little bit chaotic. But I think that the discussion, that many people are interested in this, combined with the open sourcing of the EigenD software, will create a very, very nice standard for this that we'll all be able to hopefully use and create this new standard that is as standardized as MIDI is. By the way, did I mention before the actual scan resolution of this thing? It scans each key in the X, Y, and Z directions at 10 bits level, but at 2,000 hertz. So that's a tremendous amount of data that comes out. And that's why it is so expressive. And you see they're able to get velocity information from that. But it opens up a whole number of new questions. For example, if you use continuous information, by the way, this is only OSC here. The pad is putting out proprietary information with which Tim Thompson created a program to convert that into OSC messages using the TUIO standard. I don't know if anybody knows that. It's sort of a tablet interface standard. And then in the program that Ingrid and I wrote, it converts it into individual notes and then synthesizes the sounds within Max MSP. But where was I going with this? What?
Resolution.
Resolution. Well, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say, but it was something or other. I got off on a tangent. Anyway, let's take another question. That's better. Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's where I hope we'll be going also with the effort that we've done now recently with the open sourcing. I think that's the ideal thing for everyone, because what's really a pity now is, for example, if I want to play some more interesting sounds, I have to go through an audio unit or a VST, and I have to hijack the channel model of MIDI to get polyphony out of it, and then I'm back to a 7-bit resolution because almost no software instruments understand 14-bit resolution. And then you got to figure out how to disable all the automated stuff in those software instruments, and then you got to fine-tune it so that it corresponds to how the controls come out of it. I might do a pitch bend, but it might be just too steep for the particular instrument. So there is a lot of setup going on now to get something that's not really there yet, because you got to deal with the latency, and it's you don't have that immediate response yet. So it would be wonderful to finally come to a community that would be developing instruments based on this common protocol that could be driven by other human interfaces, but still have this collection of sounds that we can all benefit from.
In many ways, these three instruments are kind of like cats in that they appear totally different, but when you really get into them, they're more similar than they are different quite substantially. And once you get past the interface, they're kind of all saying the same, trying to say the same thing.
Yeah, we have many common goals. I will say this also, it's the reason I put these events together, they're all happening this week, is that my feeling is that a rising tide floats all boats. And that I think for each of us, the biggest impediment to acceptance of the instruments is that most people say, what do I need a new instrument for? There's pianos, there's guitars, who cares? Or they'll say something, they'll see the video and I see the comments on YouTube. That'd be great if you could make it like a piano. Or things like, well, isn't that just an iPad? So it's difficult. I think for the acceptance of musical instruments, there's an interesting trend going on. A lot of kids don't really want to play musical instruments. Yeah. There's not a whole lot of time to learn the traditional musical instruments, certainly like a violin, which requires such exceptional precision to hit the right note. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why a lot of young quote-unquote musicians or producers or controllerists, whatever they're called this week, like to use loops and manipulation of loops and beats to make music, and what I call optical. What's that? What?
Drum machine?
Yeah, drum machine, exactly. I hate drum machine music.
Don't like hip-hop? Blame this man.
Dennis?
Actually, it's somewhat of a multi-part question about sound generation in and of itself. Now, the Continuum has built-in, you're saying it has sound generation inside the instrument. Yeah. So the designer can closely tie the gestural stuff to the actual instrument sounds. Whereas in your case, it's computer generated.
Yes.
Is there a standalone mode? Does it rely on a computer?
It relies on a computer, but the Eigenharp software is very closely tied to the data streams that come out of it. So we opted to not build in a DSP chip so that you can actually scale up as computers become more powerful. So a lot of time went into the design of the actual interface between the instrument going to the computer and coming back, because there is actually a headphone output here in the instrument. So that's why I'm actually not using them, but I've got in-ears that I just plug in here. So audio comes back from the computer, and then you can use whatever audio interface you want if you want to go to the main PA, if you want to amplify it.
Okay, but again, the sound generation is reliant on the program that's designed on a computer or a plugin.
Yes, but the Eigenharp software has built-in instruments, and we call them agents, that can be developed by someone else, which is where the open sourcing becomes interesting. So this physical model of the clarinet and the cello are tightly bound to the Eigenharp.
Right.
So that's
kind of where I was getting in terms of the, you have all that power, you have all that control, and if you're using a, I won't pick one, but a VST instrument,
Yeah.
you're not going to get that level of expression or level of depth unless you go into that instrument and program it. So the last part of the question is, where are you going in terms of output? Are you going to do a sound module with this? Are you going to do, just OSC or MIDI or?
Well, our plans are just to make a controller and use it with a computer program. But the computer program will offer certain sounds, but to try and offer through OSC, maybe work with some of the sound generators to be able to have patches, for example, we would write in various sound generators, popular sound generators, software sound generators, so that it gives people options that are fairly low cost additions to it.
And for all three, well, less so maybe on the Continuum, being a computer user and Luddite at the same time, the fear of bringing a computer, on stage, right? I mean, so you say you have an instrument, you go out in front of the stage, it's like a guitar. You're still bringing a computer on stage. You're still bringing something that will crash.
Yeah, it's more reliable.
Right, at some point in time. Now, if I have my Gibson and my Marshall stack, I could crash into it, but it's unlikely. Strings can break the pickup.
Let me point out that Dennis actually works for analog devices.
I've played a lot of gigs, so I'm mainly a guitar player, and I'm gigging a lot. And actually, I'm gigging with a computer. I don't use any amplifiers.
Yeah, I was a little facetious only in that I've been, I've been computers.
I haven't had
it's a tricky thing.
I haven't had a crash in a year and a half while playing live. Nothing, right? I'm just setting up. I know exactly which sounds I will get, and it just works. Well, in the meantime, most bands that I've played with, they've had their pedals break down, they've had their wiring go wrong, they've had their tubes being blown out. All kinds of problems. I've had much less problems than them. So no, I'm not scared of bringing a computer on stage.
One of the problems also is that it's much more difficult, as I'm sure you're aware, to write embedded software and complex programs using the more limited tools of DSPs and microcontrollers. At the same time, I would say that what we'll see is more of a trend towards, instead of using the instrument with the computer, it'll just be sticking an iPod Touch inside it or an Android phone as the power increases. And so that way you get the benefit of those much more sophisticated tools, because they're made for such a wide variety of applications. But you get the device actually just slips inside the instrument. So the instrument becomes a dock. The interesting thing about that too is that one of the things people complain about in software musical instruments is that they have a very short lifespan because the OS makes them obsolete, and sometimes people don't upgrade them. But if it's running on an iPod Touch, for example, you just keep that iPod Touch for that instrument, and you buy another one for this instrument. There could be, maybe in a few years or a couple of years, $99 each. Who cares?
This is what I do with computers now.
Yeah,
I've got a computer that I just set up for my guitar stuff.
I have a PC tower with Windows 98 and Master Tracks Pro on it, so I understand.
You had a question for a long time.
Did I hear you say you can't output MIDI with the Eigenharp?
You can. So it first goes through our Eigen-D software, and from there you can go to MIDI, you can go to audio units directly, which is actually quite interesting because then you can kind of bypass MIDI by using host automation parameters, which are floating point and very high precision. And Steinberg has now released VST 3.5 and has got note expression built in. And that allows you to have per note continuous controllers. And I've just experimented with it a couple of weeks ago and did a demo at Music Mess, and it works beautifully. So you can record in Cubase per note continuous controls and edit them. And this is something we're going to add now also in our software, so that you can actually use VST plugins and then directly use the streams that come out of here and tie them directly to those per note controls. So that's also the beauty, I think, of using a computer, is that it becomes really flexible over time. You can quite quickly adapt to what's coming out, right? Steinberg brought out VST 3.5. In a couple of months we'll have integrated it directly into Eigen-D, and you're off. I've got a guitar pedal, Voodoo Labs is, what's it called again? They've got this huge guitar pedal that outputs MIDI, and they've got a new version, but I can't install it because I've got to change the chip, which is ridiculous, right? So.
Can you, for example, play something like Reason?
Yes, you can. Yeah, there are people doing that.
For example, talking about MIDI, I'm sure everyone here is aware of some of the limitations of MIDI. Now, for For playing piano sort of sounds, of course, it's just fine. And if you're playing something like the sort of things I was doing on my instrument here, where you've got the control of these sort of 3D sounds where you create the envelope with your finger. Of course, MIDI has 14 bits for pitch, and if you're doing timbre changes, 7 bits might be okay. But it's that note expression, creating the volume envelope, where 7 bits just is very, very difficult, because in particular, right at the start of the note, you want to be able to have that very gradual fade in, and there's only so much smoothing you can do, and 7 bits is difficult with that.
Can we hear some more?
Sure. Do you want to do another piece? I got another piece.
I'll try something, I'm not sure what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, you sing together?
He's suggesting something, but I'm not sure it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a good idea.
I'm ready to jam.
Yeah. Well, I could play one other piece, and then also get just a short piece. Why don't I do that? This one is actually, it's on my website. If you've seen the video, it's this old Hungarian song, "Gloomy Sunday," which has a wonderful history to it. There's a myth about it that it was so sad that the people who would hear it on the radio, they'd commit suicide. So don't. I like to end every song there. I'm so pleased that we have a nice good crowd here. It's really great to see everybody here.
And can we hear a sample of the guitar sound too?
I can do that afterwards. Yeah. So this is one that I find interesting because it actually goes over MIDI, but in an audio unit instrument. It uses Sonic Couture's Glassworks sampler instrument over Contact, so native instruments. This is something I like about these instruments. It allows you to play extremely expressive instruments that are almost not available. So Le Cristal. And so with these instruments, you can get the same kind of expression out of it. So I programmed this a little bit to have a filter, bring in some scraping sounds, and then use the pitch a bit. So I decided to try to play Careless Catzy on it, for those that know it. takes a bit of setup. It's a kind of proof of concept thing that I did, which was trying to map guitar strings to these percussion keys. So, but I kind of ran out of space on the setup that I was using here to make this an instant switch. So let's see if I got it right. No, I kind of disabled that because I can't play it well enough. But I could. I disabled it.
That's the killer app. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we still got one sound, but since I just started playing the blues on this thing, I've gotten really excited about what it can do. So let's see.
this bit hands-on with the Eigenharp Continuum and LinnStrument. So at this point, why don't you come on up and lay on hands with these.
There's some of the brie out there first.
So yeah, come on up and